Outlaws of Thunder Junction spoilers are in full swing and the set is so pushed. There are a lot of things that people need to be paying attention to: Modern, Pioneer, Commander, everything. And I think we need to get into it right away with the first card on my list, which is going to be Final Showdown, a card that just showing off one of the new abilities in this set, Spree. So many options and so many interesting things when it comes to Commander and converted mana cost. Now, looking at the top right hand corner, noticing that it is, there's kind of like a little plus symbol on top of it. So a bit of a new card design breaking into the border. I think that's kind of interesting there in terms of how borders are happening. But Spree +1, so you add the additional cost on top of casting that converted mana cost. So keeping the converted mana cost of the spell as low is going to be important for something we're going to discuss in a second, but adding an additional 1 to the cost, playing 2, all creatures lose all abilities until the end of the turn, or paying an additional option or another option, choose a creature you control, it gains indestructible until the end of turn. I believe because of this wording, it actually gets around Shroud, so be very aware of that. You should be able to give your own Shroud creatures indestructible. And then the kicker, instant speed, destroy all creatures, instant speed Wrath for 6 mana. Now, I think for standard that option is really pushed, but there's a lot of cool things that you can do with this outside of low power formats. Now, specifically, I'm looking at a card like Fated Retribution, which is really the only white based board wipe at instant speed. Destroy all creatures and planeswalkers. If it's your turn, you scry to. The planeswalker bit is actually really important for this, but it is 7 converted mana cost, not very playable in many formats outside of Commander. But when it comes to Commander, Isochron Scepter is the key to this Spree ability. Isochron Scepter allowing you to imprint this card because it is a converted mana cost of 1, but if you were to add the additional options on top of this, then it would be higher, which is why it's kind of contained in the Spree ability. Now, this is obviously adding to the meme of everything is kicker, the meme where everything is just an additional cost, but this is really well done, being able to be put under Isochron Scepter. In Commander, you can have just this build your own board wipe whenever you want, and the lose all abilities option is really important for a recent problem that a lot of folks have been talking about in Commander, being Voha, Jaws of the Conclave, having Vigilance, Trample, Ward 3, and the ability on it. With Commanders having so much word soup recently, it's really important to have options like this that are so cheap, options like this that you can really do anything with at any time. But at this point, it's really adding to the problem of cards do everything these days. Like, this card is so pushed, it does so much, and it's going to be a really powerful card in a format coming to you. The next card I want to talk about for modern players is Satori the Infiltrator. Now, black and blue for a 2/3 menace legendary creature human ninja rogue. Whenever Satori the Infiltrator and or one or more other non-token creatures enter the battlefield under your control, if none of them were cast or no mana was spent to cast them, draw a card. So essentially, if they were blinked, they weren't cast, or if no mana was spent to cast them, aka the Modern Horizons 2 elementals, you draw a card. Now, the card itself, fatal pushable, very easy to remove. You can bolt it as well. It's a 2/3, but I think the synergy with Grief can't be denied. It is a card that can pitch to Grief, it is a card that can pitch to Subtlety, and then when those cards enter the battlefield, you essentially make up for the downside that these push. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to break Grief, right? We've already found our ways to break Grief in Modern, but I think its synergy with the Modern Horizons 2 elementals cannot be denied, and I think there might be some type of Esper shell that wants to use 1 to 2, maybe even 3 copies of this as an option to provide some advantage in the long game. Again, I was mentioning the blink effect does work with a card like this, because if you were to blink the Satori, it would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast this turn. So Ephemerate is the card that I'm looking at as a way to synergize with this card, allowing you to do it twice, gain more cards, and just go up on value when you Ephemerate it. Now, where this doesn't work is with cards like Crashing Footfalls. Now, obviously, if you cascade into this, you could cascade into the Satori. So I obviously don't need to go down that route. If there's other ways that you were creating tokens through these free spells, Crashing Footfalls creates token creatures that would not work. You are not able to Crashing Footfalls. You cast the Crashing Footfalls and then draw 2 cards off of this. So non-token is key. You can blink it. Modern Horizons 2 elementals, go wild, with some ninjas, and this also does work with ninjutsu, so that option is also a thing there. Now, next up is probably the most pushed 4-drop I have ever seen. Colossal Rattle Worm, green 2 for a creature worm, 6/5 that says Colossal Rattle Worm has flash as long as you control a desert. Very much Dune aesthetic right now. With Dune coming out recently, this is the Lisan al-Gaib of worms at this point. Trample, green and 1, exile Colossal Rattle Worm from your graveyard, search your library for a desert card, put it into the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your deck. This card is insane. Imagine showing this card to someone 10 years ago playing Magic. This would be a mega ultra mythic rare. This card would require a new rarity to be built on top of mythic for this to even be legal in any format. Can you imagine what this card would do to Pioneer, to Standard, to anything at the time? Maybe not Pioneer. Pioneer was doing busted stuff back then too, but the card is so insanely pushed. 4 mana, 6/5 trample. There's no downside with this card. There is no single piece of downside written on this card. It is flash as long as you contain a desert. Then when it dies, you can exile it from your graveyard to search your library for a desert, put it on the field, and enable your future Colossal Rattle Worms to have flash as long as you control the desert. And the deserts in this set are really, really good. There are some pushed effects, but before we go into the deserts, compare this to Polukranos. For those of you that have been playing Magic for a really long time, Polukranos was around when I first started playing Magic. It was around in Standard. This card was considered busted as all heck. 4 mana, 5/5 legendary creature. Notice that a Battle Worm is not legendary. You can play multiple of these. You can have multiple of these out at the same time, but Polukranos, World Eater, becomes monstrous when you activate that ability. You deal X damage divided as you want among other target creatures your opponents control. Each of those creatures deal damage to Polukranos, but it's essentially like this little like ping system, this little board wipe that you can do against weenie decks. Polukranos was crazy, but now the Battle Worm with its little desert synergies. Think about deserts such as Scavenger Grounds. Now, when you can tutor for any desert, you can create these synergies where this card being recently printed is standard legal, so you're able to create these desert toolbox decks. Scavenger Grounds being a main board way to get rid of graveyards, and then also Sunscorched Desert historically having the template of when it enters the battlefield, deal 1 damage to target player, then you add a colorless to your mana pool. This was taken and then brought about with the new kind of sweet cycle of deserts. Bristling Backwoods is the one. Bristling Backwoods enters the battlefield tapped as a land desert. When Bristling Backwoods enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent and it taps for red and green. So it has that template, but now it can be searched by the Bristling Backward kind of worm there and can be tapped for multiple colors. So a way to fix, a way to ramp, a way to tutor for different options. And then if you go back into older formats, you have the Amonkhet deserts that cycle for 2. And then you also have the Hour of Devastation deserts that can add mana if you pay life, can add colorless, and then have additional activated abilities. Hashep Oasis is the one that's on the screen right now. Sacrifice a desert for a green 1. Target creature gains +3/+3 until the end of turn. Activate only anytime you would cast a sorcery. So a lot of toolbox options in older formats. If you were going for a desert themed deck, a Dune themed deck, the Battle Worm is going to be in there, but in Standard, this card is going to be absolutely insane and could be pushed enough to see Pioneer play. The next card I want to talk about is High Noon, white and 1 enchantment. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. Green and 4, sacrifice High Noon. It deals 5 damage to any target. This is crazy. I think this is the most pushed prison effect I've seen in a hot minute. If I'm not mistaken, this is 2 mana Rule of Law, so it's 1 less with just pure upside. Rule of Law is white and 2 for an enchantment that says each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, and that is the only ability. High Noon allows you to sack it for 5 and deal 5 damage to any target, 5 damage to face. That's amazing. That's great. Like, even if you don't use it, it's just an option that you have. Other effects like this are Archon of Myria in Modern, and Deafening Silence is a common one for non-creature spells just because it is 1 CMC, so you can get out early, but that's only non-creature spells. If your opponent wants to cast multiple creatures, maybe you're playing an older format, something like Legacy, where your opponent is playing elves out, like a bunch of them all out at the same time, Deafening Silence won't be able to stop that. But 2 mana Rule of Law could actually be pushed enough to see play. Now, being an enchantment, having maybe a bit of a downside, having the option to deal 5 could be enough to overtake that. but I think Prison Effects this pushed. Come on now, this feels like Fire. This whole set feels like Fire design again. Kind of feels really pushed. Now, the second last card that I want to talk about, Insatiable Avarice. The card that is very analogous to the first card that we were talking about, Final Showdown. Insatiable Avarice is 1 black for a sorcery with Spree. You can pay 2 more in addition, so 3 total, to search your library for a card that, and then shuffle and put that card on top. Then you can also play black and then black. So again, 3 more, but you're playing black. Target player draws 3 cards and loses 3 life. Again, this card you can put under Isochron Scepter to then have a tutor on a stick the whole time that you can activate at any point. If you put this under Isochron Scepter, you just have essentially a Cruel Tutor, but at instant speed. But you don't even lose the life. It's like push Cruel Tutor. You just have more options. And this is just exactly the type of push design that changes Magic, that changes Eternal formats, older formats, modern, whatever it might be. I mean, look at the second mode. First and foremost, this is the real meme with this, right? For all my mono black burn players, black. Target player draws 3 cards and loses 3 life. Guess what? With Shieldred, if you have Shieldred out, Avarice does 9 damage. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. That means Insatiable Avarice already makes target player lose 3 life. Then they draw 3 cards, 3 times 2, 6, 3 plus 3, or sorry, 6 plus 3, 9. That's like 3 mana deal 9 damage. Mono black burn, come on, that's 3 bolts of that cost. It's so great on rate with Shieldred. Mono black burn memes for life at this point, but the tutor option is really powerful. I think this is going to be a great EDH card. I think maybe for CEDH it might be a trap, I think, just due to the cost, but I think the optionality could push it over the top. We'll see. I'm not much of an CEDH player. I'm very much getting into the format, so that's just my baseline observation. I think it's a trap, but it could be good enough because of the optionality. And again, just with that low CMC initially off the top, being able to cheat it out with different options, I think that's what we're kind of looking for here. Now, the final card that I want to talk about that I think is a massive flavor fail, Jace Reawakened. Blue for a legendary planeswalker Jace, 3 loyalty coming down. It says you can't cast the spell during your first, second, or third turns in the game. That is a static text. +1 draw card, then discard. +1, you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. And then -6 until the end of turn. When you cast a spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for that copy. Now, I hate the ultimate. First of all, it is a 1-shot effect. Not great. +1, you get some loot, doesn't even protect itself. You can't even cast it early with its kind of reduced mana cost. And the +1 on the plot. So plot makes it so you exile the card, you can cast it for its plotted cost. I'm assuming you're going to be able to cast it for its cost, but you do it later. So essentially, like, takes it out of your hand. But I'm not sure if like you're going to be able to cast it for free. If you're able to cast the card for free later, maybe it's good then. Like maybe in a format where like Thoughtseize is all over the place, you're able to hide cards. I don't know. It becomes plotted, which is nice because Jace isn't required on the field to cast that card. You can just cast it later. So it is an option that your opponent necessarily can't interact with if it's in your hand, if they have hand disruption. So it protects it from there. But this is Jace being Ashiok. That is what this lore is. Jace is, I believe, and someone on Twitter told me this, that according to the lore, Jace is pretending to be Ashiok to trick Oko. Jace, you are doing a terrible job impersonating Ashiok. First of all, Sarah Avenger effect, you can't play this early. Sarah Avenger, you can't cast the spell during your first, second, or third turn of the game. Fine. Like, you're trying to balance it that way. Every version of Ashiok mills cards, or exiles cards, or just gets cards away from the top of your opponent's deck and then manipulates them in some way. Jace, you are doing a terrible job of copying Ashiok. At least exile some cards. Exile 2 cards. Then discard a card or something, and then you may cast them this. I don't know, like do something like that. That's a red effect, to be fair, but exile some cards, mill some cards, protect yourself a little bit. This is a terrible representation of Ashiok. So I think a big flavor fail in that sense. We are finally getting what is thought to be a milled planeswalker in some way in Jace, and then Ashiok pretending, come together and mill cards. But Valky, God of Lies, is a card that I want to talk about here. This tweet from Aspiring Spike talks about how Jace should allow you to cast Valky off the top, and then that allows you with Leyline of Anticipation to potentially cast that at instant speed. So if you have Leyline out, you can cast Jace, +1 it, and then you can cast next turn at instant speed the Valky, which can then come down and interrupt your opponent and then go from there. Now, there's a lot of options that you get from that. Does this exactly mean that Valky Summer is coming back according to Spike? I'll let y'all decide in the comment section down below. That is the discussion I wanted to have around Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This set is so pushed, but let me know what you think. There's going to be more spoilers as of the recording and the posting of this video. I want to hear your thoughts down below of those cards. This is a set that is highly, like, I'm keeping track of beginning to end. It's going to be crazy. Let's get into it with Outlaws of Thunder Junction.